find that most people, they spend sort of too much time in this sort of middling speed where they can't really play clean, they can't really play fluid. If I want to go on the road with my band, reality is I just need to be sending emails basically every day to do with that. If you're wasting time for you, you're usually wasting time for three other people too.
Jacob Jolliff is one of the best mandolin players in the world. He leads his own phenomenal band, the Jacob Jolliff Band. He's won mandolin championships. He was the Yonder Mountain String Band's mandolin player. He toured with Bela Fleck as part of Bela's My Bluegrass Heart tour. My memories of being on the road with him are some of my most cherished in my musical career. He is a deep thinker with a huge heart. Here's a 30-minute fragment of our 1.5-hour conversation. If you'd like access to all the topics, all the things we discussed in our full 1.5-hour discussion, please become a patron on my Patreon page. Thank you for subscribing to the YouTube page, commenting, and I hope you enjoy this interview. All right, Jacob Jolliff, welcome.
Hello.
Let's get right into it. One thing I want to talk about that's very interesting to me, band rehearsal techniques. Yeah, how you manifest the tune.
With my group, the goal, I'm kind of always thinking in terms of performing the music. Most of my original music has been recorded, with my group as well, but, I think memorizing and getting it off the page, or maybe having it never be on the page, is sort of that's the default. So the rhythm with my group, I haven't made a lot of charts. For me, I sometimes feel like if it doesn't get charted out, it's a little bit more open to evolution and sort of easy changes along the way. And at least the way I write music, I like that. Like I'll hear something played by my group and I'll know within a matter of seconds that I don't like the theory I had, and I'll want it to be changed. And my theory is that if it's in a chart, I'd be slightly less fluid with making those changes. I tend to send around maybe a chord chart and like voice memos particularly of like notey passages that I'm going to require someone else in the band to play. And for the most part, everyone who's ever played with my group learns everything I send. This issue is sometimes I don't send enough, but they'll learn everything I send. We get together and then we put it together. We put together what I have planned so far, which, it might be, something in the realm of a fiddle tune type of melody. It might be that, but with sort of the intention that I'll expand certain sections. But, we tend to arrange kind of what I have. I get a voice memo of that. We'll stop. We might stop rehearsing because that's all I have. We might stop because we're just burned out. But once I then listen to that, which I consider sort of a draft, I'll make edits, and also hearing what's there, it'll give me ideas for what part could come next. Maybe I have an idea of what could come next that I realize won't work, and so I have to write a new thing. But that's kind of been the rhythm, is like the band plays what I have. I get a rough draft on voice memo. I listen to that. I come up with the next section or an ending or something. Granted, a lot of this kind of only works with, really good players who are good at learning by ear, and good at supplying some of their own parts, which most of my friends who are, that have played with me that are bluegrass or jazz musicians, they're used to, maybe working from a lead sheet. There'll be sections of my tunes that maybe don't really give you any more information than a lead sheet would. So, I'll give that to, I could write a part for you or a part for Ross Martin, who plays with me a lot. I could write a guitar part note for note, but also like if I just leave it open to in terms of lead sheet, like harmony, I know that with all the experience you guys have on your instruments, the first thing you do might be 10 times cooler than something I slave over writing. I will say too, I really appreciate the workflow. I would say a relatively small amount of time gets wasted, which I really appreciate. And one of the things, when there's a lot of time being spent where people are sort of explaining why they messed something up, I see that as sort of the ultimate in wasted time, because I don't care why someone messed something up. I don't care why I messed it up. The goal is to just, stop messing it up at some point soon. But I don't need to know why it was messed up. And I do think with my band, I really appreciate that there isn't a lot of time where people are kind of giving the reasons for why something's hard or why it's messed up, and instead just sort of forward thinking and how do we improve this?
Yes, I relate to a lot of that. That's one of
Yeah.
the things I enjoyed most about being in the Jacob Jolliff Band was the emphasis on not wasting time.
Right, right, yeah. Yeah.
So, redirect your emotional energy to yourself and use it for better.
But on the road, I mean, as anyone who's been on the road knows, if you're wasting time for you, you're usually wasting time for three other people too. And that's where like I don't care if someone wants to waste their own time, and I would certainly waste plenty of my own time, but your lives are so intertwined on the road that you deciding that it's worth 5 minutes to do something stupid means that three other people had that decision made for them. That they're, you know what I mean? So
Let's stay. So you're mentioning touring with Bela, and that's something I'm interested too. So you played with the My Bluegrass Heart Band. First off, you had to learn a crazy amount of music and played at a very high level. So I'd like to talk about, or I'd like to hear your process to learn that massive kind of canon first, and then maybe I'd like to, if you could sort of describe what the rehearsal was actually like when you showed up, having learned the music.
I had a pretty good amount of lead time. I think Bela called me in like November of 2021, and then the first shows were in like May 2022. Um, um, and I had never played with Bela, not even jammed, but we did get together. I think it was in January of 2022 because he was in town um, in New York, and so I just met up with him at his hotel room and we played through some stuff, and I'd already learned quite a bit of it by then. So you're asking how did I learn it? I mean, but like I said, I had learned a lot of it without the mandolin. That for me is good. Like obviously sometimes when there's like notey lines that are more technical, I'll have to work on those on the mandolin. But when there's a
Well,
lot,
can I pause there? Just
yeah.
um, to a lot of people watching or listening to this, learning a piece of music without the instrument might be a totally foreign concept. Could you kind of walk us through the practical steps of how you would approach learning one of those tunes without the instrument?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, first of all, like it's not really notated or charted out that music. So the assumption was you would learn it by ear, or at least that was always my assumption. But for me, it basically means like transcribing the arrangement and transcribing the chords. And obviously, that's going to be difficult depending on how much transcribing you've done. For me, if I don't have a perfect pitch, but if I know what key it's in, I can usually figure out the chords, and I'll have on my phone. I have a little like pitch reference that I'll use from time to time, um, and I'll actually have an easier time memorizing the chords, even if I'm having to figure them out and sort of hunt around for what the chord is. I'll actually memorize it quicker if I have to go through that process than if I look at a chord chart that tells me what it is. If I do that, there's something about the process of hunting around for it and choosing a lot of the wrong options until you find the right one that really solidifies it for me.
Yeah, no, I remember I remember you telling me that you were doing when you were learning the material that you were doing it mostly in the way you just described, kind of without the instrument. I remember thinking, that's such a smart way because it forces, I mean, at the very least, it forces you to listen to something 50 times more than you would if you just kind of intellectualize it and put it on the fretboard or something.
Right, right.
What's a rehearsal with, the highest operating musicians in the string band world is like?
Well, actually, the first rehearsal, which was at Bela's house, was just me and Bela and Cody Kilby, who was sort of subbing for Sutton on guitar. So that was interesting because we were playing the full arrangements of tunes. We weren't just jamming on them. We were playing the arrangements like from the record, but without three of the pieces, without fiddle, bass, and dobro.
Hmm.
So kind of a further test of your knowledge of the arrangement because you're not even getting to hear every part. And Bela wasn't like abridging the arrangements or anything. We were just playing them down as if the other three pieces were there. And actually, in fact, when I got together with him in January in his hotel room, we played some of the arrangements down, just the two of us too, because I'd already learned most of them by then. So the nice thing about that is it's sort of training with weights because then when you actually get to hear the other parts, if anything, it makes it easier. Certainly with, Mark Schatz playing bass, it's always going to make it easier. Um, so yeah, we did 3 days, just me and Bela and Cody, like in Bela's backyard, in May of 2022, which was awesome. It was so fun. It's one of my favorite memories of playing music. Just to, because we were, the other thing is, yeah, like I said, Bela didn't really abridge the arrangements. We would all take full solos and very little wasted time. So it was just like 6 hours of picking, just, and what I really like, there's so many things I liked about the way Bela led a band, and I've tried to like remember those to hopefully enact them with my own group. But yeah, just very kind of like very little wasted time also talking about stuff. Like I think he realizes that with really, I'm not saying he never does, but my experience with those rehearsals, and then when it got into full band rehearsals, is that like seems like he kind of knows he's hired people that hold themselves to a high standard. So when in doubt, he's like, let's just play it again. So there was a lot of like, that was pretty good. Let's play it again. Just like play a hard tune, stop it, wait 30 seconds, jump back in, hit it again. And because like there's with people that are holding themselves to a high standard and know when they mess up, they don't necessarily need to be told every little damn thing they mess up. They're already kind of auto-correcting. They just need to hit it again.
Hmm.
So I like that too. It's just not a lot of time spent pointing fingers. You did this wrong. You did this wrong. And I've noticed this with my group too. Like most of the time, I don't actually need to tell someone they did something wrong. Once in a blue moon, there'll be a thing where like, oh, clearly this person thinks this happens there, but it doesn't. But most of the times, like if they messed up, they know they messed up, and they don't need me like telling them that. And so when in doubt, just play it again. Give people the opportunity to self-correct. Kind of the way he leads rehearsals, it seems pretty intuitive, but yet, I've been in so many more rehearsals that don't function that well. But it's like, yeah, not a lot of needless talk. There's never like the tune ends and people pipe up with all the things they did wrong and how much they hate themselves because of it, and why their wrong choice was perfectly understandable. And there's just like none of that. I just love that, and I'm not saying I've never done that because I have plenty of times, but I just love that culture of just like not making excuses for why things messed up, but just focus on getting it right next time.
Maybe we could pivot and talk about just some musical stuff, because I know a lot of people watching might come from a bluegrass world and are interested in maybe dipping their toes in a little more and playing something like jazz or something with more chord changes. What's an incremental step to sort of jump from fiddle tune land to chord change land?
I think, for me, like I only started to make any real headway playing jazz tunes, and I'm still not a great jazz player, but it's something I work on all the time. But I only started to make any real headway when I really took like a small amount of tunes, and started to really try to get to know them super well. And if you're just coming from bluegrass and maybe you're not even really capable of analyzing the chords to a jazz tune yet, so you don't necessarily understand the logic of the chords, which that part gets easier, but you're just going to be spending all your time trying to think, what's the next chord? What's the next chord? And it's always going to be this sort of rear view mirror moments of like, oh, that was a half diminished. Oh, that was a something, and it's like, that's how you're going to spend your solo. It's just like looking in the rear view mirror at all the changes you've missed. At least that's how it was for me. So, when I started to make, to me, what seemed like is, some headway was when I had a list of like 10 tunes that I really liked, and I just played them like relentlessly. So that I really could get to the point of not having to think about what the next chord is. And, by playing them relentlessly, I mean improvising over them, working on the melodies. But then when it comes to navigating the changes, I did a ton of just voice leading arpeggios. So by that, I just mean, if you know all the arpeggios in a tune and you know those sort of all over your instrument, ideally, you work on maybe playing eighth notes through the tune, all in arpeggios, and always connecting to the next one at like the closest possible point. So you're not just like jumping from root position arpeggio to another root position arpeggio on another chord. Instead, it's all about like connecting them. Like, can you connect them in the closest possible way? I did a lot of that, but the thing is, if you aren't used to that way of thinking, it's super slow when you start. Like for me, it was so slow that I couldn't even really have a metronome on because my brain really couldn't handle it at any speed. So it was just really slow. But but I just did it over and over again until I could just sort of endlessly spew chord tones on downbeats, which in and of itself, sounds kind of pretty mechanical. But if you get so you can effortlessly spell out the harmony, which if I were to play through a tune with chord tones on downbeats, you can hear the harmony moving, which is really cool. Even with no harmony behind me, no chordal instrument, you can hear the harmony moving. And sort of once you can sort of effortlessly do that, then you can start to rhythmically vary it, and then you're kind of well on your way to playing like bebop, as far as I can play bebop. Or
It's a tall order to ask somebody to voice lead arpeggios at eighth notes.
absolutely, absolutely.
But I remember you telling me that, but the kind of the opening for me was when you said that thing about you couldn't even use a metronome. It had to be that slow. And I remember thinking that was very empowering for me. I thought, okay, we could,
Yeah,
I can do this. It's okay. We're gonna go extraordinarily slow. And
yeah.
it's I mean, yeah, it's still extremely difficult for me.
Me
But
too. Me too.
But yeah, it's a really satisfying thing when you start to kind of feel it and hear it in your own playing. You play extraordinarily fast. Some might say you're the fastest mandolin player in the world or close to it.
That's not true, but I thought you were going to say some might say too fast. Your thoughts? You've been accused of playing extraordinarily fast.
Somebody comes to you and says, I want to play faster. I play with a plectrum instrument, mandolin, guitar, whatever. Uh, what do you tell somebody like that?
Well, one thing is, sometimes people will say something like, "Oh, I just want to be able to play a fiddle tune at like, 110, or half note equals 110, like, with good tone and good time." But like, and then sort of there's like, I just want to be able to do this, and it kind of with this sort of prefacing it where it's like, oh, that shouldn't be that hard. And I think that one of the issues is realizing that it is really hard. It's
Mhm.
like it's not a given. Like if someone can play like a notey fiddle tune at 110 with good time and good tone, you've probably heard of them before. I mean, that's the reality of it. Like the goal for me and hopefully for other people should just be that can I kind of get so I can exist in a relaxed way at a medium tempo? Because the reality is if you can do that, then you probably can play a lot faster than that. Anything that seems to be holding me back at a high speed, it's probably present in my playing at a much slower speed. I'm just not noticing it. So if I can notice it at that slower speed, then I can start addressing it. But it's not like it just came into existence at the higher speed, at least for me. Like, I mean, so a good example would be like, say, a bad economy of motion in the left hand, meaning like fingers maybe are flying too far off the fretboard, or you're not maybe properly, maybe that's causing you to then not connect the notes in a legato way. Well, maybe you're going to really start to have that sort of crash your playing at high speeds. But the reality is, probably at a medium speed or even a slow speed, your fingers were still flying too far off the board, or you were maybe still not playing like legato by any means. So if you can sort of find that thing that's crashing your and really that you're undoing at a high speed, if you can find that at a lower speed, then you can start addressing it. And then it's almost like the slower the speed, it's like as opposed to thinking about like how do I play this right? Like what's the like slowest speed I can figure out what's going wrong? Because then you're really on the work of correcting that, you'll be able to figure out how to do that. Most of it is that if you aren't aware of it, if you can find a way to make the same mistake at a slow speed and identify it, then you can correct it.
Find the slowest speed at which you notice you're undoing. That's
Yeah,
so
the same mistake.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Well, okay, and so let's say you've spoken to me a little bit about this, and I know you've had, you know, well-attended workshops where you address right hand techniques. So how does one find one's own ergonomic and correct right hand technique.
I think probably I have kept the goal for a long time of wanting it to kind of feel like falling off a log, like um, realizing kind of that to play a whole fiddle tune or a whole 3 minute fast bluegrass song, you can't be just eking it out. Like that might work for 2 seconds, might work for 10 seconds, but it's not gonna work for a whole tune. It's definitely not gonna work for a whole bluegrass show. So you gotta kind of find a mechanism that's almost like self-sustaining, like ball bearing type thing. And that's a commonality I see between your Norman Blakes, everyone between him and Sutton and Thiele and Jake Workman, just people that have a lot of facility. They all look like it's something they could do all day. So you're kind of searching for a motion that really feels sustainable for a long time. Both a long time because you might have to play a whole tune that's fast, and a long time because you are hoping to play for many years. And I think they're both very related. In a little bit more practical or specific terms, I think in terms of all the different things that can move, and wanting there to be, wrist involved as well as arm involved. Thinking like for me, it seems like a lot of the power kind of comes from the loose wrist. But yet, if someone were to grab my arm, that would totally mess me up because I need to be able to move the wrist in place to different strings with the arm. I also sometimes like to just do this sort of toggle where I go between playing slow and perfect in this sort of orthodox way of practicing, play it slow and perfect. I like to do that, but then also maybe that's 75, 80% of your practice, but then toss in 20, 25% just into the deep end where you just let your hand be fluid, even if it means hitting wrong notes. I find that most people, I should say most students they spend sort of too much time in this sort of middling speed where they can't really play clean. It's almost clean, maybe. They can't really play fluid in moments of fluidity, but it's also still tense. And it's also neither very slow nor very fast. And so I sort of recommend more playing very slow where you're actually hitting every note right and you're playing really connected and legato in the left hand. Just basically the goal is as perfect as you can make it. And then toss in like 20, 25% of the time, maybe more, of just jumping into the deep end and let your hands, basically in those moments, your only goal is to stay completely fluid, even if it means being sloppy. So I actually find that if you just work those two poles, they'll start to like influence one another, where the sloppy fluid playing starts to become more clean and the really clean slow playing starts to become more fluid. But you maybe just don't spend all your time in this middling space where you're not really doing any one thing well.
Totally.
Yeah.
I do have memories of you warming up before going on and kind of playing something like. And I was like, man, that sounds awful. But
Yeah.
uh, was that more of a left hand thing?
Yeah, so I sort of have an equivalent strategy for working on left hand.
Um,
One thing I just wanted to say, I mean, so like I guess the through line with some of this stuff is that it's sort of worth like sometimes you have to take a kind of creative approach even to hitting technical.
yeah.
Um, and for me, that's, it has been born out of necessity of like, I've thought about this too much. I need to just hit it in a completely different way. And I try to make that sort of more and more a part of my practicing. It's also kind of fun. Like, I'll just give you a couple examples. Like one thing I do these days, sometimes I'll practice playing with no strap, standing up, which is obviously very limiting, like almost needlessly limiting.
Yeah.
But for me, one of the things that makes me realize is I can play almost as well with no strap, where I'm having to support the instrument with both hands. And so that tells me, okay, if I can play almost as well without even my strap, then I'm clearly being overly neurotic about a lot of these littler things. I can tell you don't like that.
No, I love that. I love this idea of You know, that there's just not a formula. You can't just apply a formula. You have to like
Yeah,
it's the thing is always in motion, you know, and the second you just
yeah,
decide it's a
yeah,
formula, it's like, well, that's your first that's where it's game over, right? You know, it's like it becomes
totally.
dogmatic.
Yeah.
A day off the road, how do you structure it? You know, when do you sit down and type the emails when at the same time you want to work on court soloing on Along Came Betty? You know, it's like those things to me are just in direct opposition, and yet we have to engage in both of them productively.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have lots of thoughts about how to lay out the day, but okay. So I got into a really good zone in like November and December. I do my sort of booking and email work because, like like you mentioned, I have my own band I book that band. So if I want to go on the road with my band, reality is I just need to be sending emails basically every day to do with that. Um, or that's the only way I've found. So because I don't have a booking agent, I'm my own booking agent. So I got into this great zone in November, December, where every day I was starting out at a coffee shop, the one right by my house, a great coffee shop. I would get there usually right after they open, between 7 and 7:30, and I would send emails for between an hour and 2 hours, probably. Um, and so that's
Starting with business.
starting, yeah, which kind of for a long time I didn't like to do that for years, honestly. I started with practicing. But as an adult and as someone, having to fully subsist off my own ability to go play gigs, I've realized that sort of the headspace of knowing that I've sort of moved myself professionally and like ability to make money, moved that forward a little bit, kind of provides its own kind of good headspace because I'm not just worried about that as much. So for the last few months, I've been starting with that, even though it's by no means my favorite part of the day. I do find that like if I can bust that out while I'm still kind of on my first cup of coffee, or who are we kidding, fourth cup of coffee, and still kind of waking up though, I can get that stuff done and then really be kind of at full peak of alertness by 9:30, 10 o'clock to start practicing and putting in a good practice session.
I want to ask you about pentatonics, but maybe could you give me a day of the life of Jacob Jolliff on the road, where all of a sudden you're tour managing, maybe a little bit of, personality managing and things like that, and
Well, it's a lot less practicing, I'll tell you that. It's sometimes can be really satisfying, effective practicing. I sometimes feel because when you're really limited, maybe you only have a half an hour to practice that day. Um, you know, for me, like I get in some good practicing on the road. It's just less. Um, if I had like a tour manager or we were touring on a bus, I might have more time then. But the reality is, I mean, you've been on the road with my band, and it's driving a lot during the day. And when you're the band leader, there's sort of a lot of responsibility throughout the day. I'm literally driving a lot of time. But then you get to the venue, and you can't just be the guy that immediately gets his axe out and starts playing in the stairwell for an hour and a half, because you got to be thinking about like setting up merch, sound checking, figuring out what we're doing for dinner, maybe figuring out the hotel situation. And it's all these things that, I think when I first started going on the road with the band, like I knew on paper all that stuff is my job, but I think I kind of begrudged the fact too that all that stuff was my job. Like I don't think I really ever asked other people to do too much of it, but I think part of me was just like, oh, I just want to practice. Like why don't I, why can't I just practice? Well, it's like the reason is because you're the band leader and you don't have the money for a tour manager. You are the de facto tour manager. And for me, it really has worked better ever since I sort of leaned into the fact that I'm the tour manager. And like in this last year, I started always making pretty thorough itineraries for everybody too, which just made my life and other people's life a lot easier. And it's just really kind of taking your responsibility as tour manager seriously and fully embracing it as opposed to kind of begrudging it. Because the reality is, if you want a tour manager, you got to freaking hire one, because it's not anyone else's job and it is your job. And the tour is only going to go as well as you manage it. So I'll give you one. So one funny thing about that is like But just through doing several months of zero warming up, just hitting it cold, it sounds like bad advice, but just for me, it was good advice. Or it was a good practice. I kind of broke myself of this belief that I always needed to warm up. Yeah.
But I love that, and I just see a through line with everything you're saying, like this whole idea of, there can't be a dogma of a way to be. It's like, oh yeah, actually maybe I won't warm up for 6 months. And it's like it's so opposite, and yet it's, you find such a freedom there. And I find a funny parallel, with being a father. It's like a lot of my life, unfortunately, and I don't like to admit this, but it's saying, oh, I wish I could just practice. And then yet when I lean into being a father, instead of, resenting the fact that I can't practice like I used to, everything actually gets better, and I'm a much better parent. And then like,
Totally.
in the same way that I had this preconception of, if I don't practice 3 or 4 hours a day, then I'm not going to be the musician. But then all of a sudden it's, well, I can't do that anymore. And yet I feel like I'm playing better than I've ever played in my life. So it's an interesting, I just think that's an inspiring way to be, where you say, well, this is the reality. And, you can either kind of be with the way things are, or you can kind of be against them. And
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
very, yeah, it's, you, in our small circles, you're often referred to as the monk of the mandolin. You have these kind of monastic ways of being, and but it's really inspiring. I love reading about monastic life too, because for the same reasons, these guys, they don't sleep in. They never sleep in. They're always waking up at 4 in the morning to chant or whatever, and then and they have the amount of things they have to deal with. They're not just sitting there, waiting for God to come down. They're doing a lot of things. So um,
Totally, totally.
it's cool to see that, in
Yeah, I
your
appreciate that.
in your mandolini life.
Well, hearing you say the monk of the mandolin, for a second I got my hopes up and thought you might mean Thelonious Monk, but then quickly I realized you're talking vow of celibacy type of monk.
Well, actually, going way back in our conversation to the way you're describing your band rehearsal techniques, I was thinking about Thelonious Monk, because he famously did not he he did not want his musicians learning from charts. So he really
Okay.
made people learn the stuff by ear. And, Coltrane would have to go to his apartment, and they would just sit there and just shed the stuff for hours. And there wasn't just like chart on the bandstand. So
Yeah.
oddly enough, I was thinking about Thelonious Monk.